Okay, a lot of interesting thoughts here. And now we're going to have a period of response and rebuttal amongst our panelists. Now, the audience will have a chance for Q&A, but after the second panel, we're going to save all the audience questions for then. So, who wants to go first? Who would like to respond to something that's been said?
Well, let me respond to, Andrew makes a very good case for his argument, but let me respond to the television rights issue that Andrew brought up, which has been around for a long time. Every time a new television deal has been signed, the naysayers say this is it, the golden goose is about to, turn to rock here or something, the money's going to change. A couple examples, though, just in the past couple of weeks suggest certain things. Andrew's right about the cable television model. It's under fire right now. Cord cutting has reduced subscriptions for most cable services, but the content is still being produced, and it's still going to appear on platforms somewhere, and somebody's going to pay for the right to do it. National Football League just sold their Thursday night package, by the way, to 2 networks now, NBC and CBS instead of 1, who are willing to pay the NFL a lot of money to basically simulcast games that are also being aired on the NFL network, a free ride for the NFL. But most instructive, they sold their live streaming rights to Twitter. Now, that's a platform that didn't pay rights for anything before, okay? That's new revenue for the National Football League. The NCAA just extended their CBS and Turner deal for 8 years through 2032. Previous deal was $8.8 billion over 8 years' time. Works out to about $920 million a year or something. This, I'm sorry, it was, yeah.
7-7.
Yeah, 7-7? Yeah, I think you're right, okay. The new deal, okay, is $10.8 billion for 14 years. Works out to about $1.1 billion. So they're paying more now per year over the next 8 years, well, starting in 24 to 32, than they were paying previously. So these rights have gone up, all right? Now, certainly there's concern that at some point the bloom is going to come off the roads here on rights deals, but it never seems to happen. New players are getting involved. Sports is one of the few live television entities out there, and whether that's live cable television or live streaming on the internet, on your mobile device or whatever, it's an exclusive product. There's only so much of it, and I believe there are always going to be entities willing to pay to put it on their platform. I don't have a crystal ball. We don't know if that's going to happen, but every time rights come up, the entity selling those rights, whether it's the National Football League, the NCAA, or whatever, seems to be making more money on it.
Do I get
Yes,
a
yes,
rebuttal?
yes, sure. Sure, just raise your
Like Bernie
hands.
Sanders?
Kind of looks like Bernie Sanders, doesn't it?
All right, now I'm angry. So look, first of all, the NCAA deal, let's talk about that. They're on a deal now, it started in 2011, it goes through 2024, that's $771 million per year average. They signed a deal last week for $1.1 billion a year average between 2025 and 2034. If you put that into a present value and you use a very conservative discount rate of 5%, that turns out to be, in present value, it turns out to be worth about $500 million. So you could look at that and say, aha, rights are going up. But in fact, what the NCAA has done with CBS and Turner is to sign a deal for payments way into the future that has a present value well below what their current present value is. So that is not an indication of growth in television rights. In terms of, they'll find a platform to put it, of course they'll find a platform to put it on. Everybody will find it, and sports is great. People will want to watch it. But what's happened between the 1980s and the last couple of years is that regional sports channels would charge, depending on the channel and depending on the part of the country, they charge $1, $2, $5, $6 to the cable distributor, which was usually a monopolist. The cable distributor would pass on the $6 in the cable bill in an expanded basic package with 190 channels. They put in $6, and they turn around and they pay ESPN or the YES Network $5 or $6 per month per subscriber to do that. Now, that's a tremendously beneficial package or institutional structure for the regional sports network and therefore for the teams in the leagues, because they get a much larger, they're getting to charge to watch their channel to everybody in the market instead of 10% of the market. So the subscription fees are much, much higher. And because the subscription fees are higher and there are more people who potentially are watching, the advertisers pay much, much more for spot on the show. So advertising income is higher, subscription income is higher, and that model is now is being diminished. And it's going to diminish rapidly. And it's not just cord cutting, it's cord shaving. So that the telcos are in competition with DirecTV, which is in competition with the cable distributors, and they are starting to offer smaller, or Sling TV. They're offering smaller cable bundles and specialized cable bundles, so not everybody's going to have to buy ESPN or the YES Network going forward. Now, that is going to hurt. But yes, I agree with Vince. They'll find somewhere to do it. The question is, what kind of revenue are they going to generate? And I think it's going to be a lot less.
Well, then the question is, Andy, is the implication of what you're saying is that coaches will make less money and there'll be fewer practice facilities? I don't think so. You also said that, quote unquote, they'll find a way. They find a way. And that is what they do. They find a way. And so, do you think that if you're right, which I'm a little skeptical of, but if you're right.
Oh, Joe, how's your backhand? Okay, sorry.
It's not bad, actually. Does that mean that schools will start to cut back on what they pay big-time coaches? I think it's far more likely they'll cut the tennis team, if anything.
That might be the case. I mean, let's go back also to something that Vince observed. I think is very important if we're talking about paying football players and paying male and maybe female basketball players. We have a problem with Title IX, right? Title IX doesn't allow you to give differential scholarship amounts to men and women. If women are 43% of all athletes, they have to get between 42 and 44% of the scholarship money. I think all of the court cases that have been around scholarship payments to college athletes have upheld that principle. So if we're going to start paying, whether it's $30,000 or $40,000 per player, or whether we're going to have an open market and pay more than that, we're going to have to find some way, money also, I should have said this when I was talking about taxes, we have to find some money also to pay similar amounts to the women. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at when you say, will coaches' salaries go down or will?
Well,
one of the things about coaches' salaries I think is important to understand. Matt referred to it as a free market competition, but it's a rigged market. Here I sound like Bernie Sanders again. It's a rigged market. Why is it a rigged market? It's principally, number one, because we're not paying the producers, we're not paying the players. Number two, because it's a market where there aren't stockholders that are demanding to see profits at the end of the day. They're demanding to see, their stakeholders demanding to see wins. Number three, because it's the beneficiary of all of these tax preferences and subsidies from the school. So yeah, it's a market, and those salaries are reflecting what the market forces are saying, but it's a totally artificial market.
Well, so is the market for CEOs. And so you can talk about it as shareholders, but that's a rigged market too, between boards of directors that are largely populated by CEOs, paying CEOs of one company, and in return, the CEO who sits on another board pays. I mean, it's at that level, yeah, sure, it's a rigged market. But I still, one of the things I don't understand, Andy, is why you would actually want to defend the tax deduction that boosters can get for buying a seat license. I mean, it's a business. It's a business. Some of this stuff should be taxed. The idea that this is all an educational enterprise and therefore you can take giant tax breaks so you can fill your stadium and make millions of dollars seems kind of obscene, actually.
Why do you think I'm defending that? I'm pointing out that if you change some of the current institutions, that some of the preferences that colleges now enjoy might be ended, and therefore the costs of making the transition are higher than, say, the model that Vince put out there.
Okay. Who wants to take up now?
Well, I will, just to kind of pick up on a little bit what Andy was suggesting, and I'll just briefly go through, and this proposal is not just me alone, it was in conjunction with Professor Steve Ross, who's a law professor at Penn State University. So there'd be certain mandatory requirements. One would be As Andy mentioned, healthcare, medical insurance, all of that, there's no question that should be for all student athletes across the board. And it should be at least a 4-year athletic scholarship, not the historical 1-year renewable at the coach's option. It's kind of once you come in, and that distinguishes it really from a professional model where they're, even guaranteed contracts aren't really guaranteed for the most part. It's only if you make the team. So it should be, if you come in, you're fortunate enough to get a scholarship, you've got it for 4 or 5 years, period. Whether you get hurt, whether you're not quite as good as the coach thought you were. And I think the other requirement in here, and it's an important one, is the NCAA requires that all Division I schools offer at least 14 sports. And that's problematic. Under our proposal, that would go out the door, and then each Division I school could determine what is going to be its mix of sports, of course, consistent with Title IX, gender equity. There would certainly be a realignment there. And that would also give each university the ability to be financially self-supporting. That's one of the problems, because, as Andy mentioned, these huge subsidies and stuff, at some point, that has got to end. It's just getting really unwieldy. So what we're proposing is, it's not like, for example, a governmental entity that would regulate college sports. The U.S. is very different in that we do not have, unlike many European countries, a federal government sports minister. We do not have that. It's very much a free market system, self-regulated at each level up through youth, high school, college, professional. We wouldn't advocate that there be an entity like the Federal Trade Commission overseeing this. This would be an independent group appointed by the president, and then you would have anyone who wants to could make a proposal. It could be members of Congress or whomever, and then the commission would say, well, here's what we think ought to be reasonable rules. So, for example, a cap on coaches' salaries or whatever they come up with, and then it would be entirely up to the NCAA, conferences, member schools, if they choose to adopt it. And the question is, well, why would they? Well, the carrot would be antitrust immunity. That could not be challenged on antitrust grounds because, again, by adopting it, it would be an agreement among NCAA member schools that would be subject to Section 1. And then let's say the coaches or whomever are hurt by it, you would go to an independent arbitral tribunal to work it out. I think that would, and you could, all of these various proposals could come through it that way there. I think that's a pretty good system. It's not, the NCAA schools aren't going to be able to do it. It's way too much economic self-interest. That's proven not to work. Antitrust law is not going to work. The question is, how do we come up with it? But we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. There's a lot of benefits to college sports that we want to maintain.
Okay. Let me follow up with that. Matt, in your law review article discussing the Adidas case, you actually make the statement, I have it written down here, just like Wolf Blitzer. In talking about the Adidas case, you call this another example of unwarranted judicial deference to NCAA regulation of economic competition amongst its members. There's a lot of talk about how the courts are going to settle this and are going to handle a lot of things. But, haven't we seen the courts have a tendency to look at this one way? I mean, what did you mean by that statement?
It was the Adidas case? I don't think that was the...
It's from your Adidas Marquette Sports Law Review article.
Oh, Marquette Sports, that's a different one. Okay, I thought it was, the one that I was talking about comes from an Oregon Law Review article. Well, courts, as I mentioned, have been very deferential in applying antitrust law to the NCAA. Mm-hmm. Antitrust by its nature is very, what is an unreasonable restraint of trade? You balance the anti-competitive effects with the pro-competitive justifications, and then courts have engrafted this. Is there a substantially less restrictive means of achieving legitimate pro-competitive economic objectives? That all gets into the mix, and it's very, of course, complicated. So for years, courts just basically deferred to whatever the NCAA said was necessary to preserve college sports, whether it was competitive balance, maintaining college sports as a separate brand from professional sports. But I think starting with the O'Bannon case, we're starting to see a change, whereas now courts are saying, look, these, even though they're packaged as eligibility rules, these are commercial restraints, and therefore it's got to go through this traditional, what's known as the full rule of reason, where there is a balancing, which is very difficult to apply to sports at whatever level. It's just not easy at all. So that's, I think, what I meant, because that Marquette article is probably quite a few years old.
Yes.
You know, actually, the courts have been pretty good about seeing through the NCAA's argument when it comes to adults. So Board of Regents, for instance, the universities basically said they should have the right to their own intellectual property, i.e. the right to televise their own college football games. The NCAA should not have the right to control that for them, and they won in the Supreme Court. There was a case involving assistant coaches where the NCAA, in a cost-cutting move, tried to cap their pay. They sued. They won. NCAA wound up having to pay, I think, $54 million to settle. But when it comes to 18-year-olds, the courts take a different view, by and large, until Bannon, actually. And the courts have basically said, oh, well, you know, this paternalistic system is just fine. And we're not going to apply the same antitrust rigor when it comes to an 18-year-old as we will to a 35-year-old coach. One idea I had, by the way, I like Andy's, I very much like Andy's ideas about how to, about the things, you know, lifetime health insurance and other ways to help athletes short of paying players. And I would add one more, which is a lifetime scholarship. I feel one of the problems, pay notwithstanding, one of the problems is that athletes are expected to work 40 to 50 hours a week and take a full course load of 4 to 5 classes to stay within NCAA rules that they be full-time students. Why do they have to be full-time students? Why can't they be part-time students? Why can't you lighten their load while they're eligible to play sports, and then say you can either stay beyond that and finish your degree, you might leave, you might not think college is that important, and you didn't pay that much attention while you were playing, and you decide 10 years later, you know, I really should have gotten that degree, but you should have the right to come back and get that. You've given the university a lot, and the university really owes you. You know, the bargain, the bargain is this. You work your butt off doing something that could hurt you and that takes an enormous amount of your time, and you're generating revenue for the university, and in return, you get a slim chance to become a professional and the chance at an education, which the university makes it almost impossible for you to get because of your job as an athlete. It's a corrupt bargain. The university doesn't, by and large, with too many football and men's basketball players, do not keep their end of the bargain. And a lifetime scholarship would be one way to do it. I want to comment on one thing Matt said, which I agree with, which is...
I agree on a couple things you said, too. So.
Oh, there we go. We're even. There we go. Which is that the subsidies need to go away, or are going to go away eventually. I see it through the prism of class more than anything else. You know, many college football players and men's basketball players are poor and come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And what you really have is an enormous wealth transfer from them, who are generating money, to upper middle class kids who play lacrosse. And why is that right? Why is that appropriate? If a university wants a lacrosse team, it should pay for it. Why should the football players pay for it? I understand that I understand the rationale. I just think it's wrong.
Yes, Andy?
Yeah, so I agree with what Matt says about this, which is that by having these transfers from the men's basketball team and the football team, by the way, according to NCAA statistics, on an operating basis, only 50% of the FBS basketball teams have an operating surplus, and 55% of the football teams. So it's not all football teams that are making this transfer, but where there is a transfer, I think it's a good thing. I think that what we're trying to promote here is an extracurricular activity to a student whose life, at least in prototype, is a sedentary intellectual life as a student. And so you offer dance, you offer theater, you offer music, you offer sports. And this is a complement, and this is what the NCAA says on paper, of course. It's a complement to the developing of a well-rounded student in the university. And so if we can have a lacrosse team, a men's lacrosse team or a women's lacrosse team, we're expanding output. That's pro-competitive. It provides more options for the students, and we should be doing that. And this is not a commercial enterprise. If we focus on it strictly as a commercial enterprise, then it's in fact going to be a handful of kids on the football team who are producing the extra surplus that gets transferred. It's not the vast majority of the 85 scholarship players, and it's a much smaller share of the 120. There are actually 120 students or student athletes on a typical FBS football team because there are 35 walk-ons. So yeah, we can identify that handful of people on the male football team at the Power 5 conferences that are helping the continued existence of the women's lacrosse team and the women's track and field team and the men's lacrosse team and so on, and I think that's good.
Well,
Joe,
you can major in dance, you can major in theater, you can major in music. Maybe you should be able to major in football.
Well, there wouldn't be anything necessarily wrong with creating some sort. Let me point out where Joe and I agree on, one of the things that
We're going to be best friends by the end of this.
Maybe. Well, one of the things is I think it's absolutely critical to make sure that the student athletes, all of them, have a fair opportunity to get the benefits of the bargain. And the most important component is the educational side. Very, very few people go on and play even a couple years in the NFL or NBA. And if you do, whatever money you make, it's not going to last throughout a normal working life. And one of the things that could be done is, free lifetime educational benefits, assuming that whenever you use up your eligibility or you turn pro, if you're at least in good standing, it's pretty close to zero marginal cost to have additional students. I know I don't get any more money if I've got 75 as opposed to 80. I'm sure same with you. Why not graduation bonuses? So you could tie the compensation to once you earn your degree, yes, then you get some of the fruits of your benefits. But if you don't tie it to that, then it's going to be problematic. One of the things that kind of struck me the most, I was on the PhD dissertation committee for George Kuntz, who was an NFL player for a number of years. George did his dissertation on why are there so many NFL players who are either broke, divorced, substance abuse, all these things after their career ends. And he looked, had access to data that others didn't, and pointed out if you have that kind of unique ability to make it to that level, your whole identity is as a football player. And you might be 24 or 25 or a little bit older when that ends. And if you start paying college athletes more, it's going to just further that sort of thing. And it's not going to be where we're positioning people to take advantage of great athletic ability, get a good education, then they're set up for life. That's basically what I would be advocating here.
Okay, we have just a couple more minutes. All right, I would like to hear an elaboration on the idea that Vince put forward, that if you have a pay system, there is some sort of evaluation. You have a tier system with players. There's some sort of evaluation of their ability. And it seems to me, I was a labor economist in my early life. It seems to me you're introducing merit boards here that have a terrifically complicated and contentious history in the private sector and in the public spotlight of the sports arena. I think those problems would be very much magnified. Address that a little more. How do you view that working?
Well, the evaluation goes on in sports all the time. It's
Well, yeah.
central. It's central to the product.
Yeah.
You're on the first team. You're on the second team. You're on the team. You're cut. Those evaluations are made all the time. It's one of the coach's primary responsibilities. That isn't going to change. All we're doing is applying that and attaching, salary levels to that. As far as that board that I mentioned there that would adjudicate, and we're talking, by the way, relatively small dollars here. We're not awarding millions of dollars here. So we're talking about somebody making $20,000 who maybe played more than was originally envisioned. Decision is that he's going to make $24,000. I mean, you would have to submit to this system and agree, not to challenge it in courts. There's been a lot of talk about the legal side of this today, and rightly so. I'm glad Matt's here to do it. But the reason the courts are involved in this is because somebody resisted something or somebody wanted to enforce something. If there was a general agreement between labor and management here, the courts only get involved when someone comes and asks them to get involved. The legalities here exist because, on one hand, the NCAA has resisted change and has fought the O'Bannon case for how much, a decade or more, maybe, I guess?
4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, Ed O'Bannon could have showed up and said, hey, here's what I think we ought to do, shouldn't we get some of that endorsement money? And the NCAA, in what would have probably been another universe, I guess, could have said, gee, that's a good idea, Ed, we'll give you the money. If that had happened, the courts probably would have been involved. Now, that's not realistic, I understand, but at some point, for any kind of advancement to be made, and you may recall one of the things I said, that if there's advancement going to be made in this at all, it's going to be incremental. Both sides are going to have to come to some kind of agreement. If every submission goes to court, it's going to take as long as the O'Bannon case took, and that's forever essentially. So, assessment would be difficult. A board judging it sounds onerous, but I don't think that it really would be if everybody submitted to the process and accepted it as it was. But, for this thing to advance, it's going to take, some giving on both sides. And, the history with the NCAA has not been good in that area.
Okay, any last comment? Anybody want to say something before we wrap up? All right, let us thank our panel again. This has been very thought-provoking. Now, we're going to have a short break, 10, 12 minutes, please.